Let's dive a little deeper into understanding string processing. C++ provides a string class, and you've been using that string class since the very first day, writing your very first lab. The string is a type, and it's defined as a class, and every variable that we declare to be of type is an instance of that string class. We can write them out using our insertion operator here, the two angle brackets that allow us to stream our string class into cout or any other kind of string, and that's done by overloading the insertion operator using the friend function. We just learned how to do that ourselves for our user-defined classes that we wrote. Also, the cin uses the extraction operator, and that is just overloaded as a friend for the string class. GetLine is an example of a function that takes a string as a parameter. So we know a string is just a class, and so these are all just different constructors that you can use for the string class. Here we're just calling the default constructor. We don't have any parameters for the name, and so it creates an empty string. Here we're passing in a string to initialize the value for my name. And here's an example of a copy constructor. We're taking in one parameter of string, that's my name, and that is getting copied into your name. You can take a string and actually initialize it by some substring of the name you pass in. So here we're going to start at position 3 from my name, and from position 3 until the end of the string, that's going to be put into the a name string. Here's another example where we're creating the verb by copying from my name starting at position 3, but then only taking 2 characters from position 3. Our last example is a little different because we're passing in a character instead of a string. Notice the string has the double quotes and the character only has a single quote around it. So in this case, the 5 is to say how many A's we want to put in that string. So no name will be assigned a string with 5 A's in it. We can do comparisons of strings, and you might have done this already and not realize that this is an operator overload of the less than operator that was implemented on the string class. In addition to having the operators overloaded, there's also a compare function which returns an integer. It can sometimes be confusing because if you think about asking to compare something, you would think that if they're equal, it would return true. But in this case, it wants to do a comparison, letting the user know if it's less than or greater than. And so if it's negative, if it's less than, it returns a negative number. If it's greater than, it returns a positive number. And that leaves 0 for equals. So for the compare, it's a little unexpected that 0 does mean that they're the same. Here's an example that we can look at. We're reading strings, and then we can do a comparison to sort those names alphabetically. The thing you have to be careful there is that lowercase are all separated from uppercase. So to get a true alphabetical sort, you would have to make the cases the same. Let's look at some of the operators. We've been using all of these. One that maybe we haven't used yet is the plus equal, and that's going to append the contents from the right side and store it into the left side and keep that change. Whereas the plus just concatenates the 2 strings together, which then you assign. You can use the array notation, square brackets, in order to access individual characters in your string. We started out by using the @ function to get that, but you can also just use the square brackets. Here's some examples. If we have the word dog and somebody types in hot for reading it in and then we add them together, the word 1 isn't changing, the word 2 isn't changing, but those two words, hot and dog, are put together and stored into the phrase. Then if you plus equal, then you're going to take that phrase hot dog and then append to it on a bun and store that back into the phrase. And therefore, if you were to go through and write out every character in that phrase, it would write out the hot dog on a bun. You could also just simply write out the phrase without a loop, right? Because that's what we have been doing. Strings know how an insertion operator works and can write out itself to cout. So strings have a lot of different functions, and really you could just go check them out on c++.com. And then you'll see information about it and then the different functions you can use. It's handy to use this index here over on this side. So if you wanted to know how to copy a string, you could check here. Let's look at the compare that we just talked about. You can see all the different ways you can pass in strings or positions and lengths and strings to do comparisons of substrings. And you could just check out those details and find out all sorts of different things you can do with strings. An interesting one that you might want to look at is the type conversion. So this is string to an integer, this is string to a double, and then if you want to convert the other way to a string, you can call toString. So we just talked about how strings are classes, and classes were introduced in C++. The C language does not have classes. C++ was developed by expanding the C language, and therefore anything written in C can be compiled by a C++ compiler and linked to run. But the things that are available in C++, like classes, are not available in the C language. There are a lot of instances where the C language is still being used to write new code, and you might also find yourself working with some C code that has been written, and so it's important to understand how strings are processed in the C language. And that's going to happen by using character arrays, and our upcoming videos are going to talk in detail about how character arrays are used to process strings. We don't really expect any new code written in C++ to switch over to char arrays because it's a lot harder to use, and because it's harder to use, it's prone to errors. However, it would be important for you to be able to understand what's going on if you do run across some C code that is using the char arrays to handle character strings.